Lithuania. The reason why I talk about it yesterday, I visited the KGB museum. The museum official name is the Museum of the Occupation and the Freedom Fight. And in front of the museum, it was held a photo exhibition. This is the Kengyo Uprising. Kengyo Uprising was in the 1954. This year is the 70th anniversary, and the main upriser were Lithuanian, also with Ukrainian people. It's very important historical fact, and also as I told you, this is we also have the common issue with us because this is an occupational territory, and maybe many for you, it's a very famous name in Russian, Kurilsky Ostrova, Kuril Islands. But our official name is a northern territory of Japan, because this is a north part of Japan, mainland Japan is here. These four islands is very important for us to get back from the Russian Federation. What is of course, my friends, what is real win-win? Real win-win is of course now this is the main topic of this forum, 11th forum. But what is the real win-win for all of us? For you, of course, to recover your own land and independence, and for us, of course, liberate our occupied territories, occupied islands by Russian Federation. So let's work together for the freedom. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Our next speaker will be Marcin Jerzewski. Taras or Oleg, could you please check whether he's online? Marcin Jerzewski is head of Taiwan office of the Prague-based European Value Center for Security Policy, and he's speaking to us from Taipei, I believe. Marcin, the floor is yours. Marcin, the floor is yours. You can speak.
Sorry, they can't hear us. We push our voice, so it's
Marcin, you can speak. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me this valuable opportunity to join the discussion about the emerging axis of authoritarianism stretching all the way from Moscow to Pyongyang. Either to be this afternoon or this evening, as I'm connecting with you from Taipei, Taiwan, and given my position as the head of Taiwan office of the first European think tank to have established a permanent presence in Taiwan. Of course, my remarks will seek to link the strategic choices that democratic countries have to face in light of not only Russian belligerence towards Ukraine, but also growing Chinese assertiveness versus Taiwan. The Russo-Ukrainian war has significantly reshaped Europe's strategic landscape and presented the EU with crucial strategic choices pertaining to resource allocation and its competence framework. Crucially, Russian aggression has prompted EU member states to increase defense budgets and adjust fiscal policies amid rising security concerns. The war has also highlighted the importance of addressing hybrid threats, leading to the EU's establishment of hybrid rapid response teams to counter cyber attacks, disinformation, and other non-conventional warfare tactics. Meanwhile, the EU's strategic compass for security and defense, which was officially released by the EU shortly after the onset of the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine, aims to enhance the bloc's capabilities by 2030, challenges remain due to internal divisions and insufficient focus of the document on threats from China, as well as strategic importance of the Indo-Pacific region for the European Union. Consequently, the EU's evolving security posture has implications for its relations with Taiwan, emphasizing the need for cooperation on hybrid warfare and democratic resilience between like-minded countries amid rising geopolitical tensions. The ongoing Russian hybrid warfare against Ukraine has spillover effects for the EU, but it also has spillover effects against Taiwan. This is identified by the fact that the CCP and its military theorists, leading Chinese military theorists, broadly regard Russia as the most useful case study for implementing hybrid warfare because of the frequency it has used hybrid warfare against Ukraine, but also in Africa and the Middle East. The three warfares, or Sanjan doctrine, constitutes a form of hybrid warfare that entails legal, psychological, and media means. Taiwan has constituted the original target of the three warfares campaigns, as Beijing has sought to instrumentalize political, ethnic, and socio-economic factions within the Taiwanese society, undermine the trust of the population in democratic processes and institutions, and the Taiwan-US alliance, and sway the public opinion to make it more amenable to the prospect of unification with the opposite side of the Taiwan Strait. Amid the emergence of the authoritarian axis between Moscow and Beijing, there is clear evidence of cross-pollination between the two autocracies in terms of updating their respective hybrid warfare toolkits. Consequently, the EU should engage with Taiwan to pursue mutually beneficial exchanges regarding hybrid warfare. On the one hand, Taiwanese experts with profound understanding of Chinese non-conventional warfare techniques could significantly expand the capabilities of the aforementioned hybrid rapid response teams. On the other hand, as Taiwan lacks expertise for understanding Russian warfare, its experts could benefit from knowledge transfer from their European counterparts. Given the political sensitivities, including limitations from the EU's non-recognition of Taiwan and the application of its One China policy, Taiwanese experts involved in these exchanges could be exclusively civilian and non-government affiliated. Amid the Russo-Ukrainian war, the EU finds itself at a crossroads. Many of the challenges related to the EU's ability or lack thereof to act in light of the strategic challenges it faces are related to a perpetual identity crisis. European decision makers, which includes voters, struggle to find a single, unitary direction for the ongoing process of European integration, raising questions about the acceptable scope of the EU's competences and member states' commitments to collective undertakings. This issue manifests itself also in the EU's policy documents, including the Strategic Compass, which fails to effectively define a strategy for the bloc. Additionally, as Russian military aggression against Ukraine generates spillover effects for the EU, the Union continues to face hybrid attacks aimed at undermining its institutions and processes, as well as internal unity. Division and divergences also limit the ability of the EU to act as a global power. This necessitates collective and decisive action to foster cohesion and a union which protects. Within the context of the Taiwan-EU ties, Taipei and Brussels should embrace the popular adage: crisis is an opportunity for change. 专机就是危机，危机就是专机. Due to the tacit collaboration between Moscow and Beijing, Taiwan and the EU should recognize each other as equal partners and engage in comparative threat assessments of threats originating from Russia and from China auf Augenhöhe. Recognizing the political sensitivities, this cooperation can occur outside of the government structures. Cooperation with the civil society can be highly conducive to the realization of strategic goals. While the EU currently prioritizes its economic interests in relations with Taiwan, the EU-Taiwan ties should be deepened with a new focus on its civil society, a fundamental building block of Taiwan's democratic resilience. This aligns with one of the EU's key strategic objectives, to uphold peace and security in the Taiwan Strait. Research on democratic resilience demonstrates that the strength of civil society is statistically more significant than per capita income in explaining democratic success. Therefore, a robust civil society, which the EU could further engage and support, safeguards democratic institutions and processes, even amid constantly evolving techniques of malign authoritarian influence. As the EU seeks to strike balance between maintaining its reputation as a normative power with a push to become a geopolitical actor driven by its interests, it should recognize its own agility and flexibility in shaping informal, albeit substantial, relations with Taiwan, a like-minded partner, democratic partner, facing challenges from authoritarian regimes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcin. Let me add to this presentation that Taipei office of European Values Center will be the host of the next forum of Free Nations of Post-Russia, which will be held in September in Taipei, and obviously all are invited. Oleg will provide us with more technical information later on. Now let us move to the next speaker, and the first speaker from the Russia or post-Russia space, and Pavel Ivlov from organization Ingery Maya, Free India, will speak the Russian perspective, let's say.
Okay, yes, thank you for that. How much time we have left?
Well, we have 3 more speakers.
Because I'll always try to be quick and bring in my message at that totally. You know, the topic of this panel is the global one. So the global perspective of this alliance of evils, which includes Russia and as many people around this globe share, that alliance is first of all with China, which is a really massive global power, and perhaps some smaller countries, but still, you know, bringing requesting the rest of the world and democratic world to take care about the security. So I would rather, you know, turn this topic a little bit around and think from the perspective of the democratic world. So what we, in democratic world, I'm sort of in my head of American now. We care about our national security in the US, in Europe, and around the globe. Let's include Brazil or Australia. Each country has its own national security, and that's what they care most. So what we are worried about is that the danger to our national security is within Russia or China or somewhere else. But from my point of view, the most dangerous part of that alleged alliance is, of course, Russia, because that's the real danger. It's a danger for the neighboring states. It's a country which carry on aggression against Ukraine, and who knows what are the plans in Kremlin and Putin's head, what he is going to do next. And I would say, okay, where is China in that aggressive politics? China is, of course, to some extent a friend of Russia, but it has its own big interest. And it is in our American interest, I believe, most of all, to maintain good relations with China, because at the end of the days, that country produces half of goods we consume in the United States, and that applies to the many other countries of this world. So that's the country which is manufacturing part of the world. So do we really want to fight with China? Probably not. Of course, we need to maintain it in where it is now, but it's not the immediate enemy compared to Russia, because Russia, that's the real enemy, led by Putin. So I would argue that we more concentrate on that specific and the real danger to the neighboring democratic world and to the other part of the other world democracies, not just only Democritus, actually. So let's try not to, maybe globalize too much on the issue of how Russia, Iran, China and North Korea would build their relations. They probably, these are authoritarian or dictatorships, authoritarian regimes at least. So the history gives us a good lesson that these authoritarian regimes very often, broke the alliances. They changed their roots completely. And the last but not least, I don't want all of us to forget, jumping back to the United States, we are facing the elections in November, and another authoritarian leader can easily come back and change this world again. So let's be more careful in pointing fingers to the bad people of this world and the alliances. Thank you.
Good. Next speaker is Sergei Sumlani. Sergei is a director of the European Resilience Initiative Center in Berlin. The center is dealing with various security, practical and analytical aspects of security. Before becoming director of European Resilience Initiative Center, he was for a number of years working for the Hendrik Böll Stiftung, I believe, German Green Party foundation, so he is quite familiar with the German perspectives in various things, and he's Ukrainian.
More familiar with the Germany more than I would love to regard on OHS or Scholz. No, I'm not Ukrainian. I need to correct you. I've never been one. No.
You gave me that impression. Well, take it as a compliment.
I think it is what makes me happy when people think that that my activities led to believe that I'm Ukrainian. But no, I'm not Ukrainian. I have never been Ukrainian. I don't want to appropriate any part of Ukrainian glory. As Ukraine is fighting for freedom, not only in Ukraine but also in Europe and worldwide. And yes, I was born in the Soviet Union on the territory of contemporary Russia, and I'm a German citizen. So both countries, both motherlands, my motherland by birth and my motherland by choice, have tried to wipe out the Ukrainian nation and have reached pretty much success on that field, need to say. Fortunately, have not succeeded completely. And fortunately, we will help Ukrainians to stop this madness, which Russia runs since several centuries. And Germany helped Russia a lot on that war path against Ukraine. Well, but coming back to this issue we have discussed here, I will try to be as short as possible, thinking about the shortage of time, and that it is not the first panel, so we're definitely not, me personally, not the most entertaining part of this wonderful city. We are facing a terrible disbalance in this war, and this disbalance has already been partly described in the previous panels as we were talking about the asymmetric warfare and other things. And asymmetric warfare is practically a nice sounding euphemism for we don't give you enough weapons to defend yourself. So we know that both GDP of the West and the level of equipment of our armies would have led Ukrainians to crush the Russian military, like 20 HIMARS, several Caesars and Panzerhaubitze 1000 have wiped out Russian army in first in Kharkiv region and then partly in Kherson region. So just imagine what would have happened if the United States have provided like 100 of HIMARS, and the United States has, if I'm not mistaken, 600 or 800. Just imagine what would have happened if the training mission for the Ukrainian pilots would have started in 22 and maybe even like in 2018, why not? Just imagine and. So that is not happening. So we practically forced the Ukrainians to fight with their hands tightened back and demand from them to deliver success, because as soon as you don't deliver, you don't get the next batch of equipment. That is what we have observed in Kherson offensive. That is what Uri perfectly described. Like, at the same time, neither Iranian regime, and I'm not agreed, like I respect Minister Fotiga, but I totally disagree with her when she called the crash of helicopter with Raisi a catastrophe. It was not a catastrophe, it was a wonderful, perfect event which was celebrated by the people of Iran. They were dancing on the streets. It wasn't a catastrophe, it was a wonder, like a miracle, God's blessing to the people of Iran. But Iranian regime has never limited Russia on what Russia can do with its Shahed drones. Neither the North Korea, neither other nations which directly or indirectly, like China, support Russia's war. Russia has never faced anything like a limitation of where and how they can use these weapons. None of the nations of Russia-aligned, I would say, community from Cuba to Nepal has ever raised official protests, okay, maybe protests, but not actions, when Russia hired dozens and hundreds of their citizens to send them to war against Ukraine, forcibly conscripting students, first luring them to Russia, then forcibly conscripting, using foreign students as forced labor in Tatarstan, in Yelabuga, assembling drones, etc., etc. So we can clearly see that the lesson which the world is getting from this war is not only you may kidnap, rape, torture, kill, annex, whatever you want, as long as you have a nuke, and just imagine what a terrible development it is for non-proliferation treaty, but also you may not trust democracies, because the democratic leaders of this world will betray you and sell you. And I don't want to elaborate further on the motives of the Western leaders, why they are so reluctant. But if we go into the social media, you will see a lot of explanation of conspirological character, like the United States want to weaken Russia, paying with blood of the Ukrainians, etc. And it sounds really persuasive, I would say. If you're not deep into the discussion, you could say, wow, that is the evil plan. What is the lesson people learn from this reality which they observe and interpret in their way? The lesson is, if you are an ally of the US, you're screwed up. You will be killed. You will be betrayed. You will not get any support. And it's a wonder that the Ukrainians hold for the third year because nobody believed they can.
Сейчас Украина заключила с США на 10 лет соглашение.
Because Ukraine will fail exactly as Afghanistan government has fallen. And that is a terrible development which shows that authoritarian regimes demonstrate more solidarity and more, I would say, readiness to fight for what they believe is important for them than we are demonstrating in our readiness to fight for our values. And if not the Ukrainians, and if not the Lithuanians, Estonians, Latvians, Poles, Czechs, Brits, I would say we don't know what have happened to Ukraine by now. That is actually a very bad part of this story. What is a good part of this story? There is a good part. The good part of this story is that this war has demonstrated on the level of international solidarity that countries which did not appear on our mental map as decisive global players on the field of security and or allies of Ukraine, not because you're sitting next to me, but because Japan was really the in my eyes, the largest surprise. And I think many Ukrainians could not imagine that this level of support will come from Japan. That the level of public support on the level of crowdfunding demonstrations demanding pressure on the governments from the nations in the West will be amazingly high. I don't know if my focus on Germany is because I'm a German citizen and I work in Germany and know Germany better than other countries, or maybe it's the fact, but in Germany we have a situation which is normally not typical for democracy. In no democracy I know, the public is so much strongly leading the debate, not the governmental course, partly governmental course, but the debate, not the experts, and by far not the politicians, but the public, forums that pressure demanding more support for Ukraine. We have recently seen the results of the European elections, where in Eastern Germany, in the former GDR, Muscovy-occupied part of Germany, the far-right Alternative for Germany and the far-left blocks of Sarah Wagenknecht, both are totally pro-Moscow parties, have gained combined in some regions up to 60% votes, and that is terrible. But according to the polls, even in the east of Germany, 49% of people believe that military support of the West to Ukraine must either remain constant or increase. 46% say it should decrease. 49% combined are, I think, about 25 should be increased, 24 should remain the same. But there are more people, even in the eastern part of Germany, who say the military support for Ukraine must either remain the same or increase. And in the West, it's even more. In the West, about 70% of people say it should either remain the same or increase. My organization, which is a very small think tank, founded 1.5 years ago, not a famous institution, an institution consisting out of very few people. We have raised within 15 months over 500,000 euro of donations, mostly from Germans, to buy equipment for the Ukrainian army. The idea that the Germans would donate money not only for military purpose, but for military purpose against against Russia for Ukraine, is something which nobody could have imagined recently. And we see that this level of solidarity among the people is something which partly holds, or used to hold some parts of Ukrainian front intact. And I know it from my personal experience from soldiers on the front line who described situations when equipment which had been delivered, paid by crowdfunding in Europe, saved them from being overrun by the Russians. The moment when the US Congress, US House, blocked delivery of weapons, and before the weapons were delivered with a delay, and it resulted in a huge lack of ammunition on the Ukrainian front line. It were crowd-funded FPV kamikaze drones paid by Western private donors, which helped at least several units, which I personally know, of the 47th Mechanized Brigade from being overrun, captured, or killed. This is what we could not imagine a decade ago, that once again, like during the civil war in Spain or other conflicts of the 30s years, the private decision and private initiative of private people, private persons who decided to take a side in international war conflict, play a role and can change the outcome of the war. They cannot substitute the role of the governments, of course not, but they can bring a significant impact, and that is a very good sign. The solidarity is here. The solidarity can be increased. What we see currently with the change in the course of several governments in order to provide Ukraine with more support is a good thing, but this solidarity comes from the people, from the grassroots movement. I think I will stop here, because I think that's the most important thing which I wanted to say. We need to be more solidary with, not only with Ukraine, but with all movements for freedom, then the autocracies and totalitarian regimes demonstrate of solidarity on their side, solidarity in order to increase oppression and to build more camps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sergey. As you mentioned, the solidarity and the bottom-up initiatives, they are also a powerful tool for citizens to actually do something real practical to support Ukraine when our governments are not doing what we hope they should do. And I will use example of my country, Slovakia, which several weeks ago, when our old new Prime Minister Fico, whose heart is in Kremlin and the brain is in Brussels, because in Brussels our money, he, with his rhetoric, somehow cast doubts about the Slovak support for Ukraine. Fundraising was organized by a non-profit group, and within a few days, something like 4 or 5 million euros were fundraised to buy ammunition for Ukrainian army. So
you can have an interview with the leader of this initiative, Mir Ukraine, on the video channel of the European Resilience Initiative Center on YouTube. You just open, sorry, what you mentioned. You just open on YouTube Euro Resilience channel, and there is an interview. His name is also Juraj, and we have interviewed him, I think, 2-3 weeks ago about success of his initiative. A fantastic guy. Never expected that he will manage to do it. I think he believed they will manage to raise like 50,000, at least 100,000. They raised 4.5 million.
It's by far the biggest fundraising effort that happened within Slovak society. We are not Americans, we don't donate so much money. Thank you very much once again. And I have a privilege to invite our last speaker, who is will join us online, Mr. Paul Gobel, senior analyst from the Jamestown Foundation. For those who follow the developments in Russia, he is a quite household name because he's, for instance, thanks to his regular contributions to Eurasia, they will get a lot of useful information. Paul, can you hear me? Probably not. The floor is yours. You can speak. Please, you can speak.
I'm quite ready to speak, but I didn't hear the end of your remarks, so I thought perhaps you were not finished, and so I didn't have to pick up.
Now you can start.
Meetings such as this one are important to remind those seeking political change in Russia that they are fighting not on one front, but at least two. The dependence of Ukraine, which is battling against Russian aggression, highlights not only the heroism of the Ukrainian people, but also their need for support from the West. The same thing true, of course, is for the peoples and regions of the Russian, now within the borders of the Russian Federation. They too are dependent on support from the West, some more, some less. If they don't get any, it will be far harder for them to achieve their goals. What is terribly important for gatherings such as this, and all those who care about the future, is that both the peoples inside the current borders of the Russian Federation and the West recognize that Moscow understands this very well and is taking steps internationally to make sure that there is no support or little support or delayed support for peoples within the Russian Federation who must seek their independence and freedom. In the last 6 weeks, two new bodies have taken shape, which haven't received nearly the attention internationally that they should because of the existential threat they pose first and foremost to the peoples within the Russian Federation, and second to the West as an ongoing civilizational trend. These are, of course, the formation of a new axis, just as evil as the old one, between the authoritarian government of Russia and authoritarian governments in China, Iran, North Korea, and elsewhere, who work together against democracy and against freedom for their peoples, because that is the only way they can survive. That's received some attention, and indeed it is mentioned in the title of this panel. But there is a second organization that is being set up by the Russian Federation that should be equally worrisome to us, and I want to call some attention to that. That is the fact that we are seeing, even as we speak, the revival of something like a post-Soviet or post-communist Comintern designed to unite forces not only in these authoritarian states, but importantly in the Western democracies, and keep them from acting, or at least acting in a timely fashion, to support countries like Ukraine and the peoples of the Russian Federation. 6 weeks ago, the head of the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, Sergei Naryshkin, convened a conference at which he declared that the Comintern had a lot to tell Russia today on how to deal with its opposition to how to increase its opposition to the West. As you all know, the Comintern was an international communist organization that existed from the beginning of Soviet times until World War II, when it was nominally disbanded at the insistence of the Western Allies, based on their support for the Soviet Union in its war against Germany. What the Comintern did was to subvert Western countries where possible, to act as agents of influence on these countries, and to make sure that they were increasingly aligned with the authoritarian states, confident, especially because of the willingness of authoritarian states to use military force, that any standing up to them would lead to greater chaos and greater threats, especially given that some of these, at least 3 of these authoritarian states have nuclear weapons. And that role of the new Comintern, which doesn't have a formal name yet, is to spread that message across the West. It has been extremely successful. It has managed to influence broad swaths of the population and the political elites in a variety of Western countries, including my own, the United States. And it shows every sign, with Naryshkin pushing it very hard, that it will soon be expanding into other countries and working even more against not only support for Ukraine, but any support for the non-Russian peoples and the regions of the Russian Federation. There is, to be sure, some growing awareness among some people in the Western countries that Russia under Putin is an existential threat, but the question is how to respond. And what the new Comintern is directed at is making sure that any response that does occur will be slow and much less significant than would otherwise be the case. We are watching something in which Putin is using all the techniques of the Soviet dictatorship without some of the ideological burden. Because what Putin and the Kremlin have defined is any enemies to themselves. Not just anti-communism, but any enemies to themselves, which allows them to target various groups and to exploit broader attitudes, including, unfortunately, a near universal anti-Americanism in the global South, and glowing anti-Americanism even in European countries, unhappiness with American policy for various ways, and at the same time, to revive an attitude which should have been put to bed long ago, at least 30 years ago, in that many, many people believe to this day that Russia is the only countervailing force available to the United States and to Western Europeans, and that therefore it needs to be supported as a check on what? On two things. First, it has to be a check on capitalism. Even though Russia arguably is the most hyper-capitalist country on the face of the earth, it still is viewed by many people as a check on American capitalism. And second, the view is that the West is engaged in neocolonialism, and that only Russia is opposed in opposing colonialism, even though Russia is currently engaged in a colonial war and maintains the last surviving major empire on the face of the earth. What this means is that those of us who support not only the destruction of this existential threat, namely Putin's Russia, and who support the aspirations of the peoples of the region, of the country, now known as the Russian Federation, have to find a way to challenge that. The first thing we have to do is to recognize it exists. And we also need to understand that because of the nature of the changes that have occurred in the world, going back to a Cold War alliance within Western countries is unlikely to be the case. The primary reason for that is that the Russians have, in the best jiu-jitsu tradition of Putin, used Western institutions against themselves. At the present time, there is something over 1.5 trillion with a T, US dollars of money stolen from the peoples of the Russian Federation and put in Western banks by members of the Putin elite. That is an enormous sum of money. It's gone into property, into stocks, into banks. And even if you assume that the West is only making, Western bankers and real estate agents and others are only making a few percent off of that each year, we're talking, for handling these things, you're talking about something on the order of 50 to 75 billion US dollars is going into the hands of Western elites. Surprise, surprise, these people aren't openly corrupt, but they certainly have an interest because of this in not taking a hard line against Russia, lest that money be withdrawn. And most importantly, it is precisely those people who have argued that we mustn't confiscate Russian property and hand the proceeds to Ukraine, because if that process began in a serious way, they would lose income. During the Cold War, which was prosecuted for a remarkably long time by the West, it's quite remarkable that it lasted that long. There was an alliance between the business community, which is politically powerful, and human rights and democratic activists who historically were not, but became powerful because they were able to keep the business community in line, not only because of the Iron Curtain, but because they were in a position to charge businesses in the West that played footsie with Moscow of being soft on communism, something no business could easily survive in Western countries. That has gone away, and it isn't about to be restored. But what is critical and what is terribly important for people who are in the movement represented in this conference is that the nature of the problem is bigger, the existential threat from Putin is greater, the danger of a post-Putin regime being as bad or worse than Putin is much greater. And therefore, it is the task of the peoples of now within the borders of the Russian Federation, not only to mobilize their own populations, but to address their concerns to Western publics, Western governments, of course, but also to the Western public, and to understand why the challenge today is so different and greater than it was 50 years ago. Unless that happens, it's almost certain that we won't be talking just about delays in providing aid to Ukraine and delays in providing aid to the various peoples within the current borders of the Russian Federation, but we will be talking about no aid. We will be talking about a lot of rhetoric, because that lasts longer than real action, but we will not be talking about support. And if these peoples are going to be able to stand up to Moscow and escape Moscow's rule, it will be possible only if they get aid from the West, and it will be possible only if they are able to convince Western publics that the Russian Federation, as a territorial entity, poses an existential threat to the entire world, and in the first instance, to the West. That's not going to be easy, but it can be done. And I would argue that members of this grouping of peoples, need to begin focusing less on what they perceive as existing Western elites than on democratic and anti-imperial popular movements and groups within the West who can speak for them and bring influence on their governments, in fact, against the capitalists who are now, unfortunately, in all too many cases, allied with Moscow de facto, and therefore helping Moscow prevent the West from taking the kind of actions necessary to the survival of the West and necessary to the freedom and independence of the countries, of the peoples under Russian rule today. I am unfortunately afraid that up to now, many of the movements that are seeking independence have looked far too often only in themselves. They haven't even begun to cooperate, as we hope, with one another, something that is another essential that I've talked about many times, but that they have almost completely failed about bringing to the attention of the world, not to their own people, not to those already convinced, but to a much broader audience, that what Putin is doing by creating first this axis of the authoritarian outcasts of the world, and then by creating something which I'm calling the new common term. I assume it will get a name eventually, but things like organizations like Russia's SVR are not likely to give it that simple name, which would make it too obvious what it's about. But the organizations in the Russian world of various kinds are certainly part of it, but there's going to be a lot more. Unless we begin to focus on this second front. Not just the front against Moscow, but the front against Moscow's influence outside the Russian Federation via this axis of evil and via this new Comintern. It is going to be far more difficult for the peoples of this region to achieve their freedom of independence, and it's far less likely that they will get the kind of support from the West that they should. I think it's long past time for us to all recognize that Muscovy must be destroyed, Moscovia delenda est, as we would say in Latin, and that this is going to require the joint efforts. If, and let me end with a warning, if this is not done, and even if some of the peoples and regions of the Russian Federation are able to escape the last evil empire in the world, the odds are very good that the remaining Russian rump state around Moscow, supported by its authoritarian allies in the Axis and in the new Comintern, will come down hard on all those who have been able to get out for a time and work to restore the empire. If we needed evidence of that, we need only look at what's going on in Ukraine, although we hope, all of us, that the heroic people of Ukraine will get the aid they need to defeat the Russians there. But if that does not happen, we will get a signal lesson of the dangers ahead. And so I'd like to end with an appeal to all of you to do everything you can to communicate that the threat of Muscovy is not just to the Chechens or the people of the Urals or all the others. It is a threat to humanity, to democracy, and to freedom. And that the Russian government of Vladimir Putin is using many of the same methods that the Soviet government used with remarkable success, quite frankly, until very near the end, but with additional resources that the Soviets never had. That needs to be called, the world's attention needs to be called to that, and it is my view that you all, on the first lines of this battle, on the one front, need to recognize that you have to fight on a second front as well, and that what happens on that front, all too often, will affect what happens on the first. Thank you.